Welcome to KaleidoLA. My name is Karen Rapp, and I'm welcoming you today to the KaleidoLA Artist Speaker Series. Thank you for joining us for our second artist talk with Jessica Wimbley. I'm currently on the campus of Loyola Marymount University in the Westchester neighborhood of Los Angeles, and I want to respectfully acknowledge LMU's presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino and Tongva peoples. KaleidoLA is the annual artist speaker series of the Department of Art and Art History, and I'm the director of LMU's Laband Art Gallery, and I have curated this fall series for its first time ever presentation on Zoom. I have curatorially centered artists whose work and lived experiences foreground issues of social, economic, and racial justice. All artists identify as BIPOC, an acronym that stands for Black, Indigenous, and People of Color, and several belong to LGBTQ communities. It is my great privilege to invite these artists to share their work with us. Today, I want to name the individuals who have helped make KaleidoLA function smoothly. Sari Cho Dobson, Arturo Mejia, Alegria Garcia, Damon Willick, Molly Corey, Jose Camacho, Emma Pollan, Kate Shirley, David Yee, Daniel Sumarco, Mike Sitnikoff, Keith Jones, Sharice Smith, and the Dean of College and of Communication and Fine Arts, Bryant Alexander. We have enabled the Q&A feature for you to ask questions today. Your question will be read aloud by Molly Corey, the Laband's gallery manager, at the end of Jessica's presentation. And yes, you can make comments and signal your enthusiasm in the Q&A. Jessica will receive a Q&A report. Yes, there is such a thing, so she can read your comments and follow up. This webinar is being recorded and archived on YouTube with a link on the KaleidoLA website. I take great pleasure in introducing Jessica Wimbley. Jessica is a dynamic artist and engaging speaker, as you will hear. Her knowledge of art and history is as wide-ranging as the source material that inspires her practice. Her work in the medium of collage extends from using tactile materials to opening up the possibilities of digital media that includes video. She is from the Midwest and was raised by parents who ran an advertising agency. This has contributed to the formation of her visual acuity and literacy. Her education has taken her to both coasts. She holds a BFA in painting from the Rhode Island School of Design, an MFA in visual art from UC Davis, and a master's in arts administration from the Claremont Graduate University. At the beginning of 2020, Jessica's work was featured in a solo show at the College of the Canyons Art Gallery in Santa Clarita. The director there, Pamela Lewis, had to close the exhibition early due to the pandemic. The Laband has the great fortune to host this exhibition virtually this fall. In addition to the artwork included in the show, Jessica has augmented our virtual experience as gallery goers with behind-the-scenes videos that offer insights into her artistic practice. The Laband will announce the launch of this exhibition entitled Jessica Wimbley, Belle Jet, and Cabinet Cards, and its related programming shortly. Thank you all for joining us today for KaleidoLA, and welcome Jessica to LMU. I invite you to come to the virtual podium, turn on your camera and microphone as I turn off mine. Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much, Karen. That was a lovely introduction. And welcome to my home. You're seeing me chilling in my living room or living dining room area. And it's so interesting during this time to be able to still engage in conversation in a way that can be meaningful, but also intimate in ways that, you know, before the pandemic, we wouldn't have necessarily imagined being able to be in artists' homes and be able to have conversations with them and to talk to them about their work. So this is a really cool experience for me. I've done several talks online, so each time I think it gets better. And also, I'll have to say, as somebody who can be shy or have an inner introvert, this is kind of amazing because I don't see the audience in the same way, so I don't have necessarily the same type of anxiety for those of us who are a little shy or have stage fright. So this is really cool. If you're a shy person and you want to try speaking, this is using Zoom is actually a really great format to kind of get your feet wet. Coming to this talk has been something that's been really interesting for me in terms of timing. One of the things I've been doing is going through old slides of work. And what are slides? Well, slides are these fun guys here. They're ways that people used to document work, and you would get a slide carousel and you would put your slides in it and you would project the images of your work. And you had to do this when you're applying to different programs, whether it be undergrad or grad school in a certain time period. This is like pre-2000s. And so it's interesting now because it's an archival medium to go through. So now you need to make sure you either have a slide carousel or you actually have a slide scanner to be able to see what's on these different slides and be able to transfer them to digital. So in that sense, if you're holding on to slides, you end up having this kind of old school data that becomes a little bit more difficult to access if you don't have the right technology. And the fun thing about that is because it's dated, you can get a lot of great imagery from this old source as long as you have the right technology you need to access it and digitize it. So I've been going through this process of looking at old slides, and I wanted to make sure for this talk that I showed you some images from my high school experience, knowing that a lot of students, you know, especially if you're in your first or second year, it's not too distant from where you're coming from. And so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and go into my talk with y'all. And so I'm going to start out with talking about where I went to high school. And I went to 3 different high schools, but ended up going to and graduating from Woodlands Academy of the Sacred Heart, which is a Roman Catholic all-girls boarding school. And so here is a picture of me in high school. And I have to say, when I went through and found this yearbook picture, I was dying because I'm so angsty. I'm such an angsty little Catholic schoolgirl. And I find it kind of funny just to see kind of the level of teenage angst I had at that time, especially in this picture. I was one of, as you can see, a few Black girls who were within the school. And so that was an experience in and of itself, although it wasn't something that was unfamiliar for me growing up in Barrington. But with that being said, I had an amazing art teacher, and have to say I was very fortunate in that I had access to the arts from kindergarten through 12th grade. So I was able to have access to art education. And one of my most inspirational teachers was Jamie Tuttle. And she was one of these teachers that she treated me like an artist, a real artist, while I was in high school. And it took me getting older to realize how much kind of freedom, autonomy, and support she gave me. But she was fundamental, literally helped me take some of the slides that I needed for applying for undergraduate. So she is instrumental in my life. She's very much with me in my art practice. And as I was putting this talk together, I found out on Sunday that she passed away. So it's really touching for me now to be able to have this conversation with you and be able to celebrate just the radical kindness and awesomeness of Miss Tuttle, and also kind of the melancholy that comes with this time and sharing some of this with you. So here's some super early work from me while I was in high school. And the piece on the left is oil, one of my first attempts at doing an oil painting. And I was looking at a drawing that I was actually totally had positioned the wrong way, and was having difficulty with the painting because I was essentially looking at it upside down and trying to correct the position of the figure as if she was sitting up when she was actually lying down. But I was really interested, of course, with the female figure. I think it's something when you're taught about art, you see a lot. I went to an all-girls school. And I was really interested in just thinking about different representations of women, in particular, women of color. Another piece that was really inspirational, this piece I show with just about every talk that I give. And this piece actually was taken while I was in high school. It was on a trip that I took my senior year to Accra. And I was staying with Bishop Duncan Williams and Elsie. And I went to school together, and she invited me to her house over the holidays. And so I went over and we went to one of the church services that they're having. And I was absolutely struck with these little girls, and taking this picture from really having a direct contact with the little girl and from the little girl's perspective. They made me think about a lot about Ruby Bridges. She was a little girl back in the 60s who was first to integrate her school. And as you can see, you had to have men protecting her as she went to school, because there's so much controversy and so much violence due to the idea of her integrating the school. And so I think about this representation kind of Black girlhood and bravery amongst girls. And you can see this in this iconic kind of Norman Rockwell painting, in which they're depicting kind of the bravery of a child having to negotiate not only racism and hostility from her own peer group, but from adults as well. This representation of little girls, and you can see on the image of the right, or on the left, that's my family. This little girl with the afro, that's me. That's my sister and my brothers and my mom and dad. And just looking at the images, even with my sister to kind of her sister and the age difference, this idea that there's this kind of repeated representation of Black girlhood and relating to each of these girls in different ways. Another thing I found so striking about taking this picture in Accra is that was in the late 90s. So I took this black and white photo that looks like something that could have been this in the 60s, but actually was quite contemporary within the time. So I like that relationship and that play with time. So this image in the way the little girl's represented in this piece is something that, again, it's an ongoing kind of line throughout my practice and my work. And so you'll see this little girl pop up, and on the left you see a detail from a cabinet card where you can see some of the details in the dress and how I'm kind of representing the little girl being reminiscent of this photo that I took. And again, thinking about Ruby Bridges and thinking about girlhood, thinking about where I grew up, again, thinking about this kind of teenage angst that I had while I was in school, there was hostility that I had to deal with, being one of the few, or often the only one, or the only Black person in my school or in my class. And so I can understand a level of hostility that one would experience when you're the first to enter or be in a space. As I was coming into my undergrad, I was interested in kind of capturing this experience that I had from childhood, and really thinking about memory and thinking about what is kind of the hand of the child. How do you supersize kind of the gesture of childhood memory, and relating it to kind of line drawings on lined paper. And I made, instead of actually doing these kind of simple drawings on lined paper, I actually did them on large 6 foot by 5 foot panels, and used chalk and oil sticks and oil paint, and really was aggressive with the surface to get this kind of effect that looks like it almost could be done by a child, but supersized. And I really liked how the idea of lined paper kind of functioned as a metaphor, this idea of lined paper not only functioning as this idea of learning or documentation, but also thinking about how the chalkboard, these different tools of learning, works as well, and the tabula rasa in terms of being able to kind of erase and have memories and kind of shadows from these, from the medium of the chalkboard and working with chalk, and their relationship to kind of school and childhood. I also am really mesmerized by Native American ledger drawings, and think they're quite amazing and interesting in terms of getting a perspective of what America, the visual culture of America during that time, during the 1800s, from an indigenous perspective. So those are some things in my early work, looking at high school and undergrad, that were influential. And of course, you know, thinking about childhood, thinking about high school, thinking about these kind of potent memories and experiences. My parents were really impactful. I always found them to be really fabulous. They kind of reminded me of Princess Leia and Shaft. And it also speaks to some time periods that I reference in terms of thinking of the 70s and the 80s and the time period I was born, but also references of kind of popular and material culture I was consuming when I was growing up. And this was something Karen mentioned in regards to my parents owning an advertising agency, and this idea of having conversations around the production of representation and imagery was something that was done a lot in our household, just due to the nature of the business. And so my parents worked with different Fortune 500 companies. And often they had a lot of their ads that were geared and marketed towards the African American or urban target market. And so they would be put in different publications that not only did the business have affiliations with, but it was something that was a part of our household and growing up. And one of those magazines being Jet magazine, which geared toward African American communities and news and different topics, as well as Ebony, which is another magazine from the Johnson Publishing Company that produced a lot of these different media publications for the Black community during the 50s up till today. So that's a long history of visual culture of Black representation that this publishing house has. And that's very significant in terms of how Black culture, African American culture in particular, has been represented through different imagery, advertising, etc. So here on the left, you have an older issue that's of Ebony featuring Martin Luther King. And on the right here, you have a more recent entry from Jet that is the beauty of the week that they have. And that's where you get the title for Belle Jet. I'm pulling beauties from the week from Belle or from Jet magazine as source images for some of my portraits. And so here, another representation of Jet magazine and looking how women are represented. And so not only was my family producing and different imagery that ended up going into these publications and then also consuming, then my father is also featured in it when he passed away. So there's this kind of meta relationship with the material where it's like you're creating for it, you're consuming it, you're within it, which I find interesting, especially having grown up in a predominantly white community. So for me, one of the things I enjoy looking for, and I always looked for, was kind of what were these different representations of Black girls that I was seeing from popular culture that, you know, there are different ways that I could relate to. And of course, a lot of times when I was a kid, I was compared to Rudy Huxtable from the Cosby Show, but Rudy being an important character, just like Tootie and Penny and all these girls, in terms of what I saw growing up as representations of just little Black girls. And I'm also really nerdy, and so Black nerdiness I am there for. And I also have a thing for the representation of Black nerdiness through Urkel, and so I really like him as a image. My mom, a huge advocate for reading and collecting books, and she's kind of a book nerd. And I love that about her because I would go home and then get my Barnes and Noble on. And she had a lot of great books. And I always loved looking at Africa Adorned. It was another reference for me of looking at Black womanhood, seeing women that I felt kind of looked more so like me, and I could relate to. And I thought what they're wearing and their jewelry and everything was really fly. I love women carrying things on their head. Clearly you could see some of this idea of things being on women's heads, or women carrying things on their heads, something that I've been into or looked at since high school. So looking at these different images, by the time I come to my MFA, I'm looking at how you combine these kind of different representations into the equations. What you get when you add Urkel plus Mr. T, plus a cotton flower. What are these different representations that can solve or equal Blackness? And I give an answer key that includes this like multimedia answers that include wallpaper, photos and videos. And again, there's really no answer for it. Within the photos, I'm using images referencing lawn jockeys, which are statues that some people put in front of their houses that are supposed to be like lucky talismans, but are highly racist and problematic. And I always found it interesting that people felt comfortable with having these statues on their yard, but like how would they feel if just like a real life Black person was there? So I went and had these interventions in different neighborhoods in Southern California, and referencing kind of more of a urban setting or contemporary instead of kind of a lantern that's a light, it's a bug light that I'm using. So within my work, I'm really interested in this idea of storytelling. When I was in grad school, I was introduced to Octavia Butler and fell madly in love. She just hit all my nerd senses. And I loved what she had to say about writing science fiction, this idea that you know, if there weren't really any characters, if they were Black. And so she was going to write myself in. She's like, I'm here. I can write. I'll write my own damn stories and I'll include myself. And I'm like, yes, Octavia Butler, you are amazing. And so a lot of you, if you are into science fiction, some of you may have been hearing about Parable of the Sours and Parable of the Talents right now, from Octavia Butler, which is really popular and just hitting kind of the bestsellers list now, all late, but it makes sense. I think if you're into post-apocalyptic stories that include multicultural societies and aliens and women in leadership, especially women with short fros running it, read some Octavia Butler. I definitely feel like I can place myself in the stories and be the heroine, and her writing just blows my mind. So I love her. If you're into sci-fi, I definitely recommend you picking up one of her books. I was fortunate enough to be able to go and visit her when I was in undergrad, and she was nice enough to go ahead and sign my book and tell me to persist. I'm also influenced by Audre Lorde, again, another powerful Black woman saying, if I didn't define myself for myself, I'd be crunched into other people's fantasies. So this idea of really coming up with ways of defining yourself. One of her famous texts, Zamni, a New Spelling of My Name, she coins the term biomythography. And that's a combination of biography, history, and myth. And it's something that was really important in terms of thinking about how Audre Lorde functions in her practice as a writer, but also as an activist, and these multiple kind of identities that she housed within kind of herself. And this leads to this idea of intersectionality. And intersectionality is first defined by Kimberly Crenshaw. And this was something that was done in ways to be able to address legal inequities towards Black women. What are the nuances in terms of the lived experience of Black women that were not being represented in a legal way that allowed to make amends for violence against Black women? And so some of what Kimberly Crenshaw was looking at was the relationship between sex, gender, nation, race, and class. And so when you think about intersectionality, you're looking at things together. So viewing race and gender opposed to viewing them as two separate things. And it's about being able to take into account people's experiences and multiple identities, rather than being able to place them in necessarily a singular static fixed place. It's this notion of different identities can intersect and be within a person. So I think this is something that's really important in terms of thinking about work, especially making portrait or dealing with different ideas of identity or race. And my mother's an inspiration to me, as she's contributed and is to this book about Afro-Germans after in the post-war generation. And so this idea of storytelling, she's literally telling the story of her mother and her father, and how they met, and how this idea of storytelling not only is a sharing of kind of this cultural history we have, there's this other kind of history. There's this micro level where we're looking at genetics and biology and family history. So how do you tell stories there? Well, now, because we have all these different widespread DNA testing, there's different storytelling that's within the genetic information that we have. So how does your family history and what your oral story has been told fit with the genetic history, and how you've come into being? And so I think those different modalities are interesting to look at, as well as looking at things like melanin. And you'll see this melanin ghost here. I actually is an underlying our reoccurring theme within my work that you'll see in a sec. And then I also think about storytelling at this macro level. So the formation of the universe, origins of humanity, time and space. So there's this different ways that you can approach telling stories, and looking at things like different star clusters, space, etc., especially now that we have access to Hubble images. So one of the things I've been, my sister, who's a English professor and is brilliant, referred me to this book, Physics of Blackness, Beyond the Middle Passage. What does all of this mean? It sounds pretty complicated. So Michelle Wright is asking, what does it mean to be Black? Which is part of what you're seeing me ask within my own work. What is their equation? Like, how do we get to this? Like, what is Blackness? And Michelle is stating, if Blackness is not biological in origin, but socially and discursively constructed, does the meaning of Blackness change over time and space? And so this idea of physics, or the physics of Blackness, being very much located or connected to this kind of like time space modality, and using physics as kind of like a comparative metaphor to think about how we can experience race and Blackness, was really fascinating to me. She argues that we often explicitly define Blackness as a what, when in fact always operates as a when and a where. So I like the idea of Blackness not being the static thing, or the static definition, but one that's fluid, and again connects well with these notions of intersectionality, and the different modalities, especially that you exist in as a Black woman. So when I come into the I Am Katrina series, I'm starting to work with the digital, and I'm combining different elements that I'm sourcing from popular culture to media or the news, with photos taken in different places. And so I've began doing digital collage, and doing different layers, and it includes different scenes from the border in Mexico to police brutality, to different kind of metaphors to the Yellow Brick Road in Dorothy, to this idea of the Big Dipper trying to find your way home. And these large kind of expansive pieces that have multiple scenes going on. And part of what I'm playing with is this idea of kind of space-time. What is the figure seeing and experiencing? Where is she? What does that mean in regards to her locale and how history is experienced? So looking at photographs, I looked at older photographs and very interested in stereographs, which are kind of like early forms of VR. You looked through this viewfinder and it kind of created this 3D effect. And I would take these images and continue to kind of do these different alterations where I start incorporating portraiture that starts to shift different stories and tell different narratives. During the time when stereographs were being made, you also had human fairs, and Sarah Bartman was a figure that was used during this time. So here's an example of Sarah Bartman, who was, her body after she passed away was put on display, and they actually didn't bury her until the 70s. So think about this, in the late 1800s, they had World's Fairs where they had this woman on display, both while she was alive and after her death. So the representation of this woman, I thought, was something that was really important to think of during this time where you have portraiture being developed at different times. You have the cabinet card here, that's an example, which is a 4.5 by 6 photo that was something that could be carried in your pocket. It was something that could be produced. You can make more multiples. And it was one of the ways that people were starting to be able to have and create identity in ways that they weren't in the past, where portraiture was relegated to the wealthy who had their paintings done. Now you had people kind of crafting their own identities, especially in relationship to this idea of modernity, using the camera and the camera of this idea of truth. You could kind of craft this truth. So I'm taking images of different family members and I'm combining them with different cabinet cards, stereographs, including melanin as an image that floats through the ground of the image, so that you have these kind of multiple identities and multiple portraits within the picture plane. And this piece was done on canvas. During this time when they had cabinet cards, they also would sometimes include hair. And so I also started to include hair in the work. And also doing collage that was additive and subtractive in areas, and was looking at features that ended up like looking like my mother or different people that I knew, but I didn't necessarily read race in ways, and I played with how race could be read within the cabinet cards and would kind of shift how they could be experienced. So now as I look back and I'm grabbing imagery from the Ebony and Jet magazines, I'm also starting to incorporate them within the cabinet cards within my collage, from collaging on top to being really aggressive and forward with the material and kind of ripping and tearing into it. With the Belle Jet series, I'm pulling from these beauties of the week and doing digital collage, and then I'm working on the surface in hand. I pulling images of my family, taking some self-portraiture as well, and combining different kind of figures, different representations of Black women into, again, these picture planes that speak of multiple identities. In the process, I'm using powdered pigments, charcoal, pastel pencils, graphite, charcoal, and I'm really amping up the saturation of color in areas, thinking about how you can push and pull color relationships and how you can bring different things back and forth into space. So again, you're creating this level of movement through playing with saturation of color, density, etc. And again, you have the melanin floating through the work. And I also incorporated Sarah Bartman within the beauties of the week in portraiture as well. So the last piece I'm ending with is actually a still from one of my videos that you'll be seeing as part of the online exhibition called Masking 2020. And for this particular video, I was able to pull different kind of collaging sensibilities, especially looking back at the cabinet cards and how here we go. How there's this kind of rupture within the surface of the card, and there seems to be this whole other kind of gesture and movement and motion that's happening. I really enjoyed that relationship and tension between the dimensionality of the card and the collaging, but also the color differences, the gesture of the body, the scale, the different color, the fact that you have these kind of like sepia tones with the cabinet cards, but then you're working with kind of Technicolor printing from 60s and 70s. So you have this really kind of interesting color relationship as well. And I wanted to be able to kind of capture some of the same notion of being able to pull from different images or imagery from popular culture that I did with I Am Katrina pieces, and be able to kind of create this lively and dimensional type of video that dealt with what is happening in our current cultural milieu and kind of the transformation of both having to wear a mask and the experience of being in a mask, and also being seen in a mask, and what that experience is like during this time, and then what is the backdrop culturally within that. So what are we seeing? What is that experience? Masking is not just an object that you wear on your face, or African masks that you think that you put on your face, or the helmet masks that you saw in some of the other images. These are examples of helmet masks from Sanday people in Sierra Leone. And these are traditional masks that are usually worn by girls during ritual masking ceremony of coming into their womanhood. So think of it as almost like a bar mitzvah or a quinceañera, where they come to their village, they're indicted into their village as women, and they wear these masks on top of their head. So that's part of why you have that imagery there too. But this notion of masking, it's not just something that you are, it's not just an object, it's a verb. It's something that you do, something that that transforms you. So it's a transformative spiritual experience. And it's something that also that's done usually in the public realm, and is a way to kind of access ancestors. Again, transformational process of spirituality, whether accessing ancestors or being a witness to the community about how you should behave or who was doing what. But they're within different African cultures, the masking ceremony has different transformative experiences. And so I wanted to be able to connect to the transformative spiritual experience within masking, and with, again, what it means in relationship to kind of this tradition of the masquerade, and then also what it means to wear a mask today. So these things, this video will be included again within the online exhibition. It's something that I did as part of another online exhibition, Mine and Yours. And I was able to project it within my neighborhood. So it was really excited to be able to have that projected on the side of a neighbor's house and see the neighborhood kind of enacted or engaged and made vibrant with this video. So again, there's going to be more information and more details that you'll be able to see about the cabinet cards and other details in my work, looking at the exhibition and viewing my videos. But at this point, I am happy to take any questions.
Okay, Jessica, this is Karen talking. And I think I'm going to pop in maybe as gallery view in a moment to be able to share the screen with you. Thank you for, first of all, this amazing presentation that is so deeply researched and thought through. Let me turn my camera on as well. You obviously, and I didn't mention this, but you are also an educator and somebody who's worked in the museum field as a curator and an educator, and I think that shows so much in how you approached your talk. Can I ask you a question about masking? So
yeah.
You're talking specifically about, you know, the traditions that you're borrowing in the form, but will you speak to the imagery, the content that you're using to fill the screen of your textiles, so to speak, because it is so absolutely captivating?
So I am pulling different images from news clips, different videos and different things that I'm seeing online, but it's kind of like consuming all the like glut of information that we're seeing right now, or have been seeing in terms of like, oh my gosh, what's happening, you know, today, or, you know, where are these different, what different imagery are we getting at this time? So part of what I was interested in was looking at kind of what was happening nationally and what was happening super local to where I'm currently living. So some images you'll see are within Washington, D.C. of doing the Black Lives Matter Plaza. But then other places are just right where, only a few blocks from where I live, or it's some areas of me walking around and incorporating some of that. So again, thinking about, I think I like to create this relationship, the micro macro, the kind of going from like the national to the super local, and even in terms of showing the video and projecting it in my neighborhood, it was really cool because I was able to take it a step further in terms of the locality and be like, hey, I'm showing this at my neighbor's house directly across the street, and my local neighborhood community is engaging. So I really thought it was important to kind of help contextualize the range of imageries through the different representations of the locale in which these things were happening.
What I find so interesting too is that I've been asked, I was just asked in the last 2 or 3 days about work that's being made during the pandemic, and also work that is responding to Black Lives Matter, and what I thought about that. And without kind of, you know, asking you over the summer, are you going to make work about the contemporary time, summer 2020? This piece, Masking, to me is and I have no hesitation saying this, is one of the most beguiling and kind of arresting artworks that I've seen made,
Wow.
that really speak to the moment and capture it so strongly, you know, and wordlessly, that this is so potent as a video.
Thank you. That is a huge honor because I think, especially during this time, there's a lot that you're processing. And on one hand, you know, just like everyone else, you're like, really? Like these, you know, 2020 is like, I was joking and saying that like, you could just replace every explicitive with like the word 20, just 2020. It's like, you could go to 2020. Like, you know, it's like, it's just such an intense time. This year is just like, really, 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 this is happening too. And so there's, you could be overwhelmed, you know? And one of the things as an artist, I feel like we're so fortunate because we have a space and a way to process some of this. So when I made this video, it was really fresh. I was like, I'm not sure, but you know, I wanted to make sure that I made something that felt very authentic to how I was feeling and to the moment and the time. And wasn't something where, you know, I don't want to present myself or how I'm feeling as necessarily, I don't know if I would say like everybody's going through these fresh emotions. So it's like, I just want to be able to capture some of those nuances and not necessarily turn into something that's just specifically a didactic, like didactics for a social justice moment. Like, I don't necessarily want to make that. I want to make something that feels meaningful and authentic and isn't necessarily reactionary, but is responding and processing this time period. That was a mouthful, but I hope that answered some of your question.
Oh, we have a couple questions from the audience.
Right on.
Yes, all right, we'll start. The first is a comment and question. It starts, gorgeous work, Jessica. Thank you for sharing your trajectory. I loved hearing, seeing the linkages between the many reoccurring elements found in your work. Can you share something that you're reading, watching, listening to, etc., that is giving you life right now, and or an artist that you'd like to amplify?
Okay, so Raised by Wolves is giving me so much life right now. Like, that was some real sci-fi that I'm like, thank God, you know, Thursday was yesterday because I needed my fix. I needed my weekly fix. I'm really enjoying that and finding that to be a beautifully told story. I mean, they had me at the intro. I love the intro. So if you have HBO, I definitely recommend Raised by Wolves. As I was mentioning, right now I'm reading The Physics of Blackness, and it's like, wow, it's like I love speaking to my sister and getting like references from her, because not only is she one of the smartest people that I know, but I feel like you work with a visual language, right? So you're spending all this time trying to develop this visual language, and then you have to kind of go in reverse and then develop a language to talk about this visual language that you just created. So sometimes that process can be a little head turning, and I love being able to speak to her because she'll be able to point me to a writer that articulates either ideas in my work or things that I'm trying to express, where I'm like, I want to express it in this way, I'm not quite sure. And then some wonderful writer comes up with the language that articulates what you just visually did, and you're just like, thank you. An artist that I would like to, there's so many great artists out there right now. Of course, like every artist I've worked with Biomythography, amazing. That's just a great artists in general, group of artists. Let's see, what else is giving me life right now? What am I doing? I'm also doing some gardening. That relaxes me, and especially being able to be outside after not being able to for a little bit with the fires. Another let's see, what else is giving me life? I've been listening to Good White, what is it? Nice White Parents or Good White Parents. I listened to that podcast recently, and that was about kind of the New York school system. I'm like, dude, public school, it's hardcore. But I thought that was interesting in terms of how it laid out whiteness in relationship to education. So yeah, and I'm also just like an anime head, so I dork out on a lot of stuff. I like anime, I like sci-fi and whatnot. That's giving me life. Sometimes, especially if I'm in work mode, I'll kind of put blinders on and hyper focus, not look at some art and stuff for a while. And it's more about kind of consuming different things that aren't necessarily related to the visual arts at all.
Well, that's interesting that you said that, because the next question I have, many of the questions are about inspiration, so they feed into each other. The next question is, you spoke about how pop culture from the 70s and 80s impacted your work. Was music a part of that? If so, what music or artists of that time were inspirational to you?
It's interesting because so my parents met and fell in love in like Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, Michigan area. So they were like in close proximity to Motown when Motown was hot, and was like in its prime. They were like teenagers. So I grew up, my father loved Smokey Robinson and like Mary Wells. And oh my gosh, my mom loves blaxploitation, like soundtracks and music. Like, and I come from a family that like we bump our music in our ride. So it's like, you know, my mom would be listening to Isaac Hayes and she'd just be jamming. And I loved it. My brother was, I have two older brothers and an older sister. My older brother, my oldest brother was a DJ in college, in high school. So he has like a whole set of music that I'm used to like listening to him just spin. So he grew up more on the East Coast. So he had like some more East Coast sensibilities, and there's a 13-year age difference. So if you think of the show, gosh, what was that show with that Will Smith kid? That was that
Fresh Prince?
Not Fresh Prince. Oh, I'm totally. What was it? The Get Down. So think of the soundtrack, or like this idea of like when hip hop was starting, and its connection, it's linked to like R&B and disco. Some of that sound, East Coast sound, being influenced, that I really liked that sound as well. My sister like was into jazz and she sang opera. And so she got me into like Nina Simone and Nancy Wilson and Betty Carter. My art teacher, actually, Jamie Tuttle, she actually got me to be an Al Green head, and because that was like one of my studio jams that we listened to in high school. So even to this day, I jam out to Al Green. So yeah, the music of that time period was definitely a jam for me. Also, for just growing up. Especially looking at the 90s, it was like house music is something that I'm just like, yes. Like, so when I heard Cardi B's like WAP, I was like, that sample of there's some hoes in this house. It's like, I understand that on a very real level from like house music. And I was like, yes, Cardi, I love you forever for that. So yeah, I like music. Lately, some of the stuff I've been listening to, I really like Jay Electronic's new, or not so new, it came out like in December to New Year, but it took him forever to do. But Jay Electronica is like, his new album it's great studio chill for me.
I think we have time for one real quick question, which I think is a good one, especially for young artists. What kind of challenges do you face when it comes to copywriting and other legal permissions as it relates to your use of found imagery and uses of pop culture?
The issues that come up is that I've had is mostly if I wanted to do something in the public realm. So let's say I wanted to do a public art project and I have like a McDonald's sign or something within the artwork, or if you're pulling from some of these different places, those imagery, when they're in the public realm in that way, it could be more difficult for you to be able to use them. I pull from so many places and put them together and set in a lot of different ways. So sometimes, a lot of times it transforms from what it was. With the collage, it's like I'm literally buying the materials and physically collaging or scanning them. So I haven't faced too many issues at all outside of thinking about, again, what you use for public art and what are those concerns. But I think you just have to be sure to do your due diligence in terms of how you're using the image. With art, you do have a lot of leadway, more so in other fields. So I say play.
Jessica, this is Karen.
Mm-hmm.
And I would love if you would share just a little bit about what you shared with me the other day about this public art piece that you will be doing.
Yeah. So I just found out. So I'll get a little bit more information, but it is with the Sculpture Gallery in Minneapolis. They have a social justice billboard project, in which they have the billboard right at the corner of 38th and Chicago, where George Floyd was murdered, and they're giving artists grants, or helping to fund artists to do different billboards for that site. And so I was one of the artists selected to do that. So that's a huge honor. I'm excited to see how that will work. I will definitely post images and stuff when I have it up.
And I want to encourage everyone, in the very near future, we'll be broadcasting the launch of Jessica's virtual exhibition on the Laband's website. And what I would love everybody to think about when they do see the work is how Jessica is using her hand to make collage with physical materials, using her hand to work in the digital realm, in the video realm, like the masking still that we just saw, because I think the importance of that cannot be overstated. Also, in terms of her videos that will show her in the studio, so to speak, making work with her narration about some of the choices, selections that she's making when she's doing her her cabinet card collages, for example, and the power of seeing a Black artist, a Black female artist, and a Black female artist's hand in her work. I thank you, Jessica, so much, the team behind the scenes as well today. And I'm thrilled to have had the opportunity to be a curator of the series. Next talk will be on Friday, October 9th, with George Rodriguez, who is a ceramic artist. He will be in talking to us from Philadelphia. Thank you so much for watching and participating in KaleidoLA. Take care.
Thank you.